Book 5, Salem. Safety Assured Leaving East of Medicetti. Chapter 16. Sometimes it takes years to understand how something's supposed to happen. When Perrin and Guide Gleese came out onto the back porch, it was to hear laughter. So Shem glares at me, points his fork, and says, "Perrin, do something or I will," Deck told Mrs. Gleese. She laughed. "I would have loved to have seen his face when you kissed Jatesy in front of everyone and in the middle of dinner." "He cried when they told him they were getting married," Pato said. "Father's been calling him Crybaby ever since." "Well, not quite. Not until he found out I was expecting," Jatesy clarified. "The first time he put his hand on my belly and felt the baby moving, I thought Deck was going to have to remove him from the room to calm him down." Perrin and the guide only smiled at the laughter. Mrs. Gleese saw the seriousness in her husband's eyes and asked, her tone heavy with meaning, "Everything go well, dearest?" "Of course." He put a hand on Perrin's shoulder, and Mari noticed some kind of parchment was in his other. "Perrin has agreed to go on a little hike with me in a few weeks when calving is finished. We'll make sure it's well after Jatesy is finished, too," he nodded to her. "A hike?" Mari asked. "Yes, to see a ruin, Mari," Perrin said with a hint of a smile. She sat up taller on the steps of the back porch. "Ruins! May I go as well?" Guide Gleese chuckled. "Another time, I promise. And to all of them. But this time I will take only Perrin and Shem and—" He turned to Pato. He studied him for a moment before saying, "You. Pato, you are to come as well." It wasn't a request, but a statement of fact. "Me? All right," Pato said, a little unsure, but not about to argue with the guide. At least not since Mari pulled him aside in the kitchen and threatened his very life if he didn't start acting more respectful toward the Gleeses. "Why?" "Because it's been known to us since we first came here, but this will be new to you. Salem will remain a peaceful place until the end of the test. But before the last day, we will see upheavals and turmoil that no one here has ever experienced." Mari shifted worriedly. "But that may not be for many more years, right? Many more lifetimes? I mean, I've always pictured the last day to happen hundreds of years from now." Her voice trailed off when she saw the earnestness in Mrs. Gleese's face. She shifted her gaze to her husband. Mari did so as well. "We always like to believe we have more time than we do," Gleese said. "All those little things we'll do later. But later comes far more quickly than we want to admit. Mari, I understand you love old things. Here, take a look at this." He held up the parchment, pulled a lantern off the nail where it hung by the back door, and placed it on the floorboard so the family could see the document. They were silent as they read the words. Deck was the first one to look up. "Perrin, you're the one from the highest ranks, aren't you?" He leaned back a little as if his father-in-law were contagious. Jatesy looked up at her father in surprise, too. Pato's hand went to his chest until he forced it down again. The only one not looking up was Mari. Her finger traced the words again and again, and Perrin watched her intently. When she finally pulled her eyes away from it, she was smiling. "My dream of 19 years is beginning to be fulfilled today. Just days ago, I knew it never could be. But Salem is a place full of miracles. You were always meant to be—" She looked at Guide Gleese for confirmation. He smiled at her. "Salem's general." No one noticed that Pato had stopped breathing. Mari grinned. "Salem's general. You're to be the general for a side that, until days ago, you never knew existed." Pato leaned against the railing and buried his head in his hands. Mari, surprised at his strange reaction, gently touched his shoulder. "Pato?" He quickly shook his head, glanced up at her with a reassuring smile, then put his head down again. "General Shin," he whispered. Jatesy looked at the parchment again, then at her parents. 19 years? General? All right, I know I missed something here. Perrin still watched his wife. Sometimes it takes years to understand how something's supposed to happen. Jatesy, Deck, Pato, it's not time for you to know everything, but you can know this. Your mother knew the night we became engaged that she would be living in a wooden house surrounded by mountains. Her children gaped at Mari, but she beamed at her husband. And when I was 18 and traveling to Edge to spend the season with the Denzels, I knew that I would someday become a general. Neither of us could have imagined those dreams would come true here, but obviously, the Creator has a far greater imagination than either of us. "Ah, well said," the guide declared. "Sometimes we wish we knew the end from the beginning, but that would take all the joy and mystery out of life, wouldn't it? I thank the Creator He isn't limited by our feeble imaginations." "I'm guessing," Jatesy said, shaking her head in daze about what she was hearing of her parents, "that we don't need to worry about any dinners." "No, I will not be that kind of general, Jates. I only create the plans for securing Salem. General is just the title, so everyone I enlist to help knows that I'm in charge." Mari squirmed in anticipation. "Why ruins, guide? What's the significance?" The guide sat down on a stump on his porch. Mari marveled briefly that the Creator's chairman of Salem had old stumps for stools on his back porch, just like she had in Edge. "I'm not entirely sure, Mari, to tell you the truth, but I have a good idea. I only know that I am to go there in a few weeks with those the Creator has sent me." He gestured to Perrin and Pato. "The ruin was a temple created many civilizations ago. From our best guess, over 1,000 years ago, but maybe 2 or even 3,000. Mari gasped at the numbers. Concerned about her breathing, Glees paused. Perrin patted her on the shoulder. "She'll be doing that a lot," he told the guide. "Just keep going." Glees kept a watchful eye on Mari, who was fairly panting. Many years ago, this great stone temple, now only a foundation with broken walls that are overgrown with vines, was the site of the last gathering of the Creator's people. The images carved there suggest that they were being chased down by their enemy, and they took refuge at the temple. Then some kind of deliverance was sent. The last image is of the people holding up their hands in what seems to be joy. There are many stones with markings that we guess are other languages and writing systems, but we've never been able to understand them. However, it seems that the temple ruins may have been used as a refuge for others' last days a few times since then. "This has," Mari gasped, and Perrin patted her on the back, "all happened before?" "Many times, with many civilizations on this sphere," Glees told her, his brows furrowed in worry. "The Creator establishes patterns and follows them. Are you going to be all right? Can I get you something?" She shook her head vigorously and rolled her hand to tell him to keep going. "If I were to guess," he continued, still keeping the gasping Mari in his view, "I would assume that this is where our descendants would gather as well at the end of their test. It would make sense He'd send us there as well." "How far is that ruin?" Pato asked, since Mari wasn't able to. "Not too far," Glees bobbed his head. "About 9 miles from here in the southwest is a canyon. That lasts about a mile, then opens into a vast valley we've never allowed to be settled. The few times people have gone there and dug in the ground, they found steel arrowheads and rusting balls of iron. Larger iron balls may have smashed down the remaining walls a few civilizations ago. Iron balls? Perrin rubbed his chin in thought. Knocking down walls. They must have been propelled in some way. Glees shifted on his stump, as if uncomfortable. "We have a theory about that," he said cagily. "We'll try to find a few for you. Most have been buried by time and by those who find them. Anyway," he said, seemingly eager to shift the subject again, "at the end of that valley is a mountain, but the top is flat like an immense table. The front of it is a sheer cliff overlooking the valley, but we've cut a trail along the side full of switchbacks that's much easier to scale. The trail itself is less than a mile up to the site of the ruined temple. Behind that ruin, on top of the mountain, is a large plain that sinks down into a hidden valley, sheltered by mountain peaks. It's almost as if the mountain in the middle had the top of it cleanly sliced off to create an enormous flat camping area. The temple ruin is near the front of it, overlooking the cliff in the valley." "That's quite a journey," Mari whispered, her breathing calming down enough to let her speak. "Oh, it's not bad," Pato smiled. "With horses, we could be there and back in just 2 days, maybe even do a little fishing." "I wasn't thinking about your trip," Mari told him. "I was thinking about families, children, expecting women, and the elderly trying to reach safety when the army of Idemia is on their heels." "Oh," Pato whispered. Mrs. Glees nodded. "Now it sounds a bit harder, doesn't it?" Dec put his arm around Jatesy. "Our hope is," Guide Glees continued, "that with sufficient preparation and warning, the people of Salem won't be running frantically. They'll be able to move in a manner carefully planned so that no one's left behind or in a panic." He shifted his gaze to Perrin. So did Mari. "Sounds like his kind of work. And it sounds like you found your purpose as well," she said to her husband. "Why not just move people there now?" Pato asked. "If you know the end's coming, go sit at the end and wait for it." Glees chuckled. "I love the optimism of youth. First, my dear boy, there isn't enough room for 120,000 people to sit and wait for something that may not happen for generations. Second, we can't live our lives in fear of some distant unknown terror. We have to live each day now. Enjoy the now. Rejoice in the now. Do you really want to sit at a ruin until you're an old man fretting and wringing your hands? Or do you want to go out and find a beautiful young woman and see what the Creator has in mind for you next?" "Beautiful young woman, Guide. Show me where they are." The entire family gawked at Pato. He slapped his hand over his mouth. "What happened to 'I'm never getting married here'?" Jatesy reminded him. Dec snorted. Pato shook his head. I don't know why I keep saying such things. I really don't." Glees laughed. "Finding beautiful young women is your job, Pato. I quit doing that kind of work 53 years ago. But I promise you, at your new congregation are many lovely girls. I was visiting there just last season. I go to every congregation. Takes me 2 years to make the rounds, but you can believe me, she's out there. You'll find her." At the end of that long, exhausting, incredible day, Pato wearily tromped into his bedroom, which he hadn't yet fully inspected. Earlier, when he'd found the pocket knife and heard that food was being delivered, he headed downstairs, not too concerned with where he'd sleep that night. But now he smiled at his room, about the same size as an edge, and decided that he should see what the other drawers in his dresser contained. He experimentally opened a drawer and peered in at the tidy stacks of tunics. The crinkling in his shirt pocket reminded him of what had been hiding there all day. He pulled out the thick parchment envelope, gently removed the document, and smoothed it on his new bed. When he read the words about the greatest general that the world would ever see, His chest burned in sublime anticipation. "This is it, isn't it, Grandfather? Here in Salem? We got him here." Then, feeling the dishonesty of his statement and realizing that Salem likely wasn't a place for exaggeration or for cynicism, Salem was going to take a lot of getting used to, he sighed to himself. Anyway, realizing that he needed to be more accurate, or Salem would be running him back to Edge, he said, "This is where he's supposed to be that greatest general. Right, Grandfather? That's what you were trying to tell me, back at the kickball field in Edge." His dark bedroom didn't answer anything, initially, but in the distance he heard a low rumble, as if the cosmos were sending him an answer via thunder. The rumble swelled ominously, impressively, until Pato was forced to admit that it was only one of the Zenus's wagons leaving their work on the Brighter's house for the night. Still, it was a good effect, and he took it. Grinning, Pato slid the document back into the envelope and was about to put it into his pocket for safekeeping when he stopped. Under the tunics was as good a spot as any, Pato decided, and he shut the drawer because he was home. In a dark office of an unlit building sat one man. Around Nico Mal were strewn 19 years of notes, questions, findings, conclusions, and drafts of the greatest study never published, human nature. The room looked as if the author had taken the crates of meticulously written pages and hurled them in an explosive fit of rage, which, in fact, he had done. The old man now sat calmer, primarily because he was exhausted, and stared at years of wasted effort littering his study like an untidy blizzard. It was no longer an experiment. It was personal, oh, so very personal. It had been ever since the Shins deliberately defied him by taking that stolen caravan to Edge. No, Mel considered. No, it started much earlier than that. It began with a nosy little woman who dared to suggest his elevated thinking and high-minded measures were no better than the selfish and despicable kings he deposed. It started with her. He wondered what else there was to do. How does one take revenge on those who no longer officially exist? They abandoned him, his project, and his world without a thought for anyone else but themselves. He kicked aside some of the papers scattered around the floor until he saw the hastily written note that had arrived by messenger not long ago. He bent over, retrieved it, and tried to smooth the crumpled page he had balled up earlier that day. There was a beginning, a rather impressive beginning at that, he was loath to admit. He stood up, went to his desk, shuffling through several inches of parchment, and pulled out a quill and ink. Then he began to write one idea, then another, and another as quickly as they flowed into his mind. He would not let them destroy his greatest work. There was one more reaction that still could be observed, and it was going to be the most extraordinary one ever. It just might even change the world. And that's the end of that chapter. Thank you.